The air in the ballroom feels thick, a humid gold lit by chandeliers. There's a low hum of conversation, a symphony of ambition and expensive fabric. I stand beside David, his hand warm and solid at the small of my back. He's talking to someone, his voice a low, steady baritone, and I nod politely, my eyes scanning the crowd. Then I see him. Across the room, by the bar, he's laughing. A deep, confident sound I once loved, now a rusty key in a locked door. Mark. My ex. He's with a woman, blonde, sharp angles, draped in something that glitters. They look exactly as I imagined they would, a tableau of stolen happiness. My breath catches, a tiny, involuntary gasp. David's hand tightens gently. He follows my gaze. Mark's eyes flick across the room, scanning faces, probably looking for someone important, someone who matters in this ecosystem of power.
His gaze lands on me.
The laughter dies in his throat. His face, usually so controlled, so smooth, crumples. The color drains away, leaving behind a pasty, sick white. The woman beside him stops talking, follows his gaze, then looks back at him in confusion. He doesn't notice her. His eyes are fixed on me, wide, panicked, like a cornered animal seeing the trap snap shut. He takes a step back, bumping into the bar, a glass rattling precariously. The confidence leaches out of him, replaced by pure, unadulterated horror. He knows. He sees me, not just recovered, but standing here beside David. David, the man whose name has been whispered in these circles for weeks, the man everyone here is desperate to impress. David, the new CEO. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know, bringing these stories to life. Before the sterile scent of the hospital, before the cold text message, there was just us. Mark and me. It wasn't a fairy tale, not the kind you see in movies, but it felt like ours. A comfortable rhythm built over years. Early mornings, the shared weight of the duvet, the smell of coffee he always made strong, just the way I liked it. Evening debates about his work, my small freelance projects, the endless cycle of laundry and groceries and planning for some vague, sun-drenched future. He worked hard, climbing the corporate ladder. I supported him, the quiet force behind the ambitious man. I handled the home, the logistics, the emotional scaffolding. He was good at his job, ruthless in that quiet, charming way that makes people underestimate you until you've already won.
I admired it then.
His drive, his focus. My life felt grounded, stable, maybe a little predictable, but in a good way. I liked our small routines, the comfort of knowing what tomorrow would bring. We talked about buying a house, maybe starting a family later. Always later. His career came first, always, and I understood. I supported that. My own work was flexible, adaptable. It fit around his schedule, his needs. I didn't mind. It felt like a partnership. Two halves building a whole. Then came the surgery. It wasn't life-threatening, they said. Routine. A necessary procedure to fix a nagging issue that had been causing me discomfort for months. We discussed it, Mark and I. He was supportive, booked time off, promised to be there. It felt like another hurdle we'd clear together. A temporary pause before life resumed its comfortable trajectory. I remember packing a small bag, feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. The relief of finally getting it done. The trust one had, not just in the doctors but in Mark. He was my rock. The hospital room was small, bright, sterile. The air smelled of disinfectant and something vaguely metallic. I remember the nurse checking my vitals, her smile kind but distant. The anesthesiologist explaining things in a soothing voice that felt like it was coming from underwater. The cold of the operating room, the bright lights, the mask going over my face. Then nothing. Waking up was like surfacing from a deep, dark ocean. Groggy. Pain pulsed through my body, a dull, persistent throb that anchored me to the moment.
My mouth was dry.
My head felt heavy. I blinked, trying to focus on the ceiling tiles, the 4 drip beside the bed. The nurse came in, asked how I was feeling. Everything was a blur of hushed voices and soft movements. They gave me pain medication, and the world softened around the edges. Hours bled into each other. I drifted in and out of sleep. The pain was manageable now, a low ache instead of a sharp knife. Mark wasn't there yet. I figured he was stuck in traffic, or maybe caught up at work.
He'd arrive soon.
He promised. I checked my phone, lying on the bedside table like a forgotten artifact. No missed calls. A few messages from friends. One from Mark. My fingers fumbled with the screen. The bright light felt harsh on my sensitive eyes. I tapped on his message. It wasn't long, just a few lines. My brain, fuzzy from the anesthesia and pain medication, struggled to process the words.
Can't do this anymore.
Need space.
Moving on.
Lawyer will be in touch.
Sorry.
It felt like a mistake. A prank. A message meant for someone else. My hands started to shake. The pain in my body flared, suddenly sharp and unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the icy shock flooding my veins. I read it again. And again. The words didn't change. They just sat there on the screen, stark and brutal in their finality. He had ended our marriage, sentenced me to divorce, via text, while I was unconscious, sliced open, and vulnerable. The man who promised to be there, who held my hand before they wheeled me away, had cut me out of his life with a few taps on a screen. A choked sob escaped my lips. It hurt to breathe, hurt my stitches, hurt my soul. The sterile room felt suffocating. The beeping of the machines sounded like a cruel, mocking countdown. Alone. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. In a hospital bed, recovering from surgery. My husband had just divorced me. The days in the hospital after that were a blur of physical discomfort and raw, emotional agony. The nurses, bless them, saw something was wrong. They asked if I was okay. I mumbled something about bad news. How could I explain? My husband, the man I thought loved me, just texted me goodbye while I was on the operating table. It sounded absurd, even to me, like a bad Lifetime movie plot. Getting out of bed felt monumental. Each movement sent jolts of pain through my abdomen. But the physical pain was a distraction, almost welcome, from the gaping wound in my heart. I tried calling him. His phone went straight to voicemail. I texted back, pleading, confused, angry. No response. Silence. The silence was the worst. It amplified the feeling of being discarded, like something broken and useless. I couldn't go home. Not really. Our apartment was our space, filled with our things. How could I go back to the place where he had plotted this, lived this lie, all while pretending everything was fine? A friend, Sarah, a kind soul from my book club, offered me her spare room. It felt like charity, like I was a stray animal taken in out of pity. I was weak, physically and emotionally. I barely ate. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, my mind replaying every moment, searching for clues I must have missed. Was there someone else? Was this planned? The text had said, moving on. Legal papers arrived shortly after I was discharged. Delivered to Sarah's house. Cold, impersonal documents outlining the dissolution of my life. His lawyer was aggressive, pushing for a quick settlement, one that heavily favored him. He claimed I was incapacitated, unable to make sound decisions, which, at that moment, felt terrifyingly true. I barely had the energy to sit up, let alone fight a legal battle. Finding a lawyer felt impossible. My funds were limited. My energy was non-existent. I called lawyers, explained my situation through choked sobs, felt their polite, professional distance. It seemed my vulnerability was not a strength in this world. Everything felt stacked against me. The physical recovery was slow, painful. The emotional recovery felt stalled, maybe even impossible. Every news report about happy couples, every rom-com I tried to watch, every song on the radio felt like a cruel joke. The world kept turning, oblivious to the fact that mine had shattered. He didn't just divorce me. He erased me. He changed the locks on the apartment we shared. His lawyer insisted on inventorying my belongings, as if they were his property. He closed joint accounts, leaving me with access only to a small amount of money he deemed sufficient, an allowance in the middle of a crisis. My name was systematically scrubbed from shared bills, shared accounts, shared history. It was more than separation. It was an obliteration. I tried to negotiate, to reason, to beg through my lawyer. His response, filtered through legal jargon, was always cold, unyielding. He wanted a clean break, minimal fuss, maximum advantage. It became clear this wasn't a sudden decision born of unhappiness. It was a calculated move. The timing, while I was literally incapable of defending myself, was no coincidence. It was strategic. Rumors started filtering back to me through mutual acquaintances who weren't fully Team Mark. He was already with someone else. The woman from the bar, I assumed. Younger. Prettier, according to the whispers. They were seen together at company events, at restaurants we used to love. My pain became gossip, fuel for the perpetual motion machine of social circles. The humiliation was a fresh layer of agony on top of the betrayal. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. Physically weak, emotionally numb, financially precarious. Every day was a fight to just exist. Getting dressed felt like running a marathon. Making a simple meal felt like preparing a feast. The future stretched before me, a vast, empty space I had no idea how to fill. The recovery wasn't linear. Some days I felt a flicker of strength, a tiny spark of anger. Other days I just wanted to curl up and disappear. The physical pain lingered, a constant reminder of the surgery, which was now inextricably linked to the betrayal. My body felt broken, just like my heart, just like my life. The legal battle dragged on. Every document, every demand from his lawyer, felt like another assault. He was relentless, using his resources, his influence, to wear me down. My lawyer, though competent, was expensive, and the meter was always running. The stress exacerbated my physical recovery. I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating properly, and the pain in my body often flared. It felt like I was drowning, pulled under by a current of his making, too weak to swim against it. He was winning. He was getting everything he wanted, a new life, a new partner, and a divorce settlement that would leave me with very little. There was a point, a low point, lying in that spare room, staring at the ceiling, when I honestly didn't see a way out. The despair was a physical weight on my chest. What was the point? He had taken everything, my home, my security, my belief in love, my dignity. He had planned this, waited for my most vulnerable moment, and struck. And I had fallen.
Hard.
The thought of just giving up, letting him have everything, letting the current pull me under, was strangely tempting in its finality. But then, a different kind of feeling started to stir within the despair. A tiny, flickering ember of resentment. Then anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but a cold, hard stone forming in my gut. The sheer injustice of it. The cruelty. He hadn't just left, he had orchestrated my destruction. And for what? A younger woman? A cleaner slate? The sheer audacity of it began to fuel something else. A quiet refusal to break. The midpoint shift didn't arrive with a fanfare or a sudden realization under a dramatic sky. It arrived in increments, like the slow dawn after a long night. It started with necessity. My lawyer suggested I look into some support groups, not just for divorce, but for recovery from major life events. She saw I was struggling not just legally, but existentially. Reluctantly, I went to one. It was held in a community center, smelling faintly of stale coffee and Lysol. I sat in a plastic chair, feeling awkward, listening to strangers share their pain. One evening, someone mentioned a professional networking event for people restarting their careers or looking for new opportunities after a life change. It wasn't my world. I was still physically recovering, nowhere near ready to jump back into work. But the idea of being around people who were building, not just surviving, felt intriguing. I needed to get out of Sarah's spare room, out of my own head. I forced myself to go. I bought one new, simple dress that didn't pinch my still sensitive abdomen. I practiced smiling in the mirror. The event was held in a modern building downtown. Lots of glass and steel. People mingled, talking business, exchanging cards. I felt completely out of place, my quiet freelance world a million miles away from their corporate hustle. I gravitated towards a corner, nursing a glass of sparkling water, feeling the familiar urge to retreat. That's when he approached me. "Finding your feet?" he asked, his voice deep and calm. I looked up. He was tall, with kind eyes and a relaxed posture that seemed at odds with the high-energy room. He wasn't dressed in the sharp suits everyone else wore. His blazer was good quality, but the look was more approachable. "Something like that," I managed, my voice feeling rusty. He smiled. "David Chun. I'm new in town myself, in a way. Just getting settled in."
We talked for a while.
About the event, about the city. He didn't ask intrusive questions. He seemed genuinely interested in listening. He talked about his work, vaguely, as someone who was taking over a significant role at a large corporation. He was easy to talk to, grounded, and he had a quiet strength about him. I didn't mention my situation, the divorce, the surgery. It felt too raw, too heavy for the setting. We exchanged cards. Mine looked pathetic, a simple card for my freelance services. His was sleek, minimalist, impressive. He suggested meeting for coffee sometime. I agreed, surprised at myself. There was no agenda, no expectation. Just a simple offer of connection. Meeting David for coffee was like stepping into a different dimension. He was everything Mark wasn't, or everything Mark had stopped being. He listened intently. He remembered details from our first conversation. He talked about his philosophy of work, about building teams, about integrity. It was a stark contrast to Mark's win-at-all-costs mentality. He asked about me, not in a probing way, but with genuine interest in who I was, what I thought, what I cared about. Slowly, cautiously, I started to open up. I didn't dump my whole story on him at once, but snippets emerged. The difficult year, the health issue, the unexpected life changes. He never pried, never judged. He just listened, offering quiet empathy and support. His presence was like a balm. Being with him, I started to feel less like a broken thing and more like a person finding her way. We started spending more time together. Dinners, walks in the park as my physical recovery progressed. He was patient, kind, funny. He challenged me gently, encouraged me to think about what I wanted, not just what I needed to do to survive. He celebrated my small victories, being able to walk a little further, finding the energy to cook a meal, a small win in the divorce proceedings. With him, I wasn't defined by my past, by the betrayal. I was just me.
And he liked me.
As I grew stronger, physically and emotionally, the anger didn't dissipate, but it changed. It became colder, sharper. Being with David, seeing what a healthy, respectful relationship looked like, highlighted the true ugliness of Mark's actions. It wasn't just that he left, it was how he did it. The deliberate cruelty, the timing, the attempt to leave me destitute and helpless. That cold stone in my gut solidified into a core of quiet resolve. I didn't want revenge, not in a petty sense. I wanted justice. I wanted him to understand the magnitude of what he had done. And I wanted to build a life so undeniably good that his betrayal would look like the pathetic, short-sighted act it was. The divorce finalized. Predictably, it wasn't fair. He got the apartment, most of his shared assets, citing my lack of contribution during the marriage and my instability post-surgery. It was a kick in the teeth, even though I expected it. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office, feeling defeated and numb. He had won that battle. He had successfully used my vulnerability against me. That same week, news broke in the business world. David Chen was officially taking over as CEO of Sterling Corporation, the company Mark worked for. Where he had climbed the ladder, where he felt invincible, the world felt suddenly strangely small. I didn't connect the dots at first. Sterling was a big company. Mark was just a manager there, albeit a high-ranking one. David was coming in at the very top. Their paths might cross, but surely it wouldn't impact Mark significantly, would it? But the universe, or perhaps just cold, hard reality, has a way of delivering consequences. As David settled into his role, I learned more about the situation at Sterling. It hadn't been doing well. The previous CEO had overseen a period of stagnation and questionable management decisions. There were rumors of internal issues, departments underperforming, a culture of complacency, even some whispers of unethical practices in certain divisions. One evening, David was working late, reviewing reports. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's a mess," he said, not really to me but to the air. Deeper than I thought. So much dead weight, so many people in positions they shouldn't be, riding on past successes or sheer bluff. My mind immediately went to Mark. He was definitely a master of bluff. He had always exaggerated his importance, his contributions. Was he part of the problem David was uncovering? I started doing some quiet digging of my own, using old contacts, discreet online searches. It wasn't hard to find the breadcrumbs. Mark was in a division that was consistently underperforming. There were reports of missed targets, disgruntled employees. And then I found something else. Something that made the blood run cold. Buried deep in old forum posts, cross-referenced with some public records, I found hints of shady dealings related to contracts Mark had overseen a couple of years ago. Nothing concrete enough for a lawsuit, but enough to raise serious red flags internally. It wasn't direct theft, but it was creative accounting, leveraging relationships in ways that benefited him personally while potentially costing the company. It aligned perfectly with a ruthless ambition I knew he possessed. The cold stone in my gut sharpened into a point. He wasn't just a cheating husband who left me when I was down. He was potentially a liability to his company. A company now run by David.
I didn't know what David knew.
We kept our work lives largely separate, respecting each other's professional boundaries. I wrestled with what to do. Did I tell David? Risk bringing my messy past into our stable present? Could I even prove any of this? It felt like I had a handful of sand. The harder I squeezed, the faster it slipped through my fingers. But the alternative was letting Mark continue, perhaps even thrive, in a system where David was trying to bring integrity and performance. Letting him get away with everything. The injustice of it gnawed at me. He had taken my home, my financial security, my peace of mind, all while potentially building his career on shaky, unethical ground. The turning point wasn't a single moment, but a slow build of resolve, fueled by the contrast between the man who broke me and the man who helped me heal. David's integrity, his commitment to doing things right, highlighted Mark's fundamental rot. I realized this wasn't just about personal revenge. It was about consequence. About the fact that actions, especially cruel and unethical ones, should have repercussions. I started compiling everything I could find. The public records, the forum whispers, cross-referencing dates and projects. It was a tedious, painstaking process. Each piece felt like chipping away at a wall, revealing the structure of his deception. I didn't tell David exactly what I was doing. I just became quieter, more focused, spending hours on my laptop after he went to bed. I considered sending the information anonymously to Sterling's HR or compliance department. But that felt too indirect. He might wiggle out of it.
He was good at that.
I wanted him to understand, on a fundamental level, that his actions had caught up to him. And I wanted him to see me, the woman he discarded, be the catalyst. The opportunity arose unexpectedly. David mentioned an upcoming company event, a major networking gala to introduce the new leadership team to key clients and stakeholders. Mark, as a senior manager, would likely be there. David asked if I would accompany him. My heart leaped. This was it. The perfect stage. I spent days getting ready. Not just the dress, the hair, the makeup, but mentally. I rehearsed the scenario in my head. Seeing him. His reaction. My reaction. I wouldn't be the broken woman he left. I would be strong.
Poised.
Standing beside the man who now held his professional fate in his hands. I also prepared something else. A small, discreet file. A summary of the information I had gathered, carefully documented and cross-referenced. Not accusations, but questions. Red flags. Enough to trigger a serious internal investigation if placed in the right hands. I knew who the general counsel at Sterling was, a woman known for her strict adherence to compliance. The evening of the gala arrived. Stepping out of the car felt like stepping onto a stage. The building was magnificent, all glass and light. The air vibrated with anticipation. I took a deep breath, David's arm linked through mine, his presence a steady anchor. We walked into the ballroom. The light, the sounds, the smells, it all hit me at once. The energy was palpable. We were immediately surrounded by people eager to meet David, to make an impression. I smiled, made polite conversation, feeling a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching myself from above. And then I saw him.
Mark.
Laughing by the bar, with that blonde woman. Looking every bit the successful, charming executive. For a split second, the old pain, the humiliation, flared. But it was quickly extinguished by the cold resolve I had cultivated. David was introducing me to someone important, a board member. I nodded, listened, waited. Mark looked over. His eyes met mine. The air in the room seemed to thin. The noise faded into a distant hum. I saw the exact moment recognition dawned. The smile slid off his face. His eyes widened, flicking between me and David, standing close, comfortable, possessive. The color drained from his face, leaving it pasty and shocked. He stumbled back, knocking into the bar. He mumbled something to the woman beside him, who looked confused, following his panicked gaze. He was trapped. Publicly, irrevocably trapped. Seeing me here, radiant and strong, on the arm of his new boss, was the last thing he expected. He hadn't just divorced me. He had divorced David's wife. The irony was brutal. David, sensing the shift in my demeanor, the sudden focus on Mark, followed my gaze. He saw Mark's reaction. David didn't know the full history, not yet, but he knew enough to understand the significance of this moment. His hand tightened on my arm, a silent question, a silent support. Mark started to move, pushing away from the bar, a look of desperate calculation flashing in his eyes. Was he going to try and leave? Pretend he didn't see me? Before he could make a move, David, in his calm, authoritative voice, said to the board member he was speaking to, "Please excuse us for a moment. There's someone I need to introduce you to. A key manager in one of our divisions. Mark Davis, isn't it?" David steered us, subtly but firmly, towards Mark. Mark froze, caught like a deer in headlights. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape that wasn't there. We stopped a few feet away. Mark forced a weak smile, eyes still wide with terror. "Mr. Chen, I didn't expect."
"Ah,
"Good evening." David's expression was unreadable, calm, professional. "Mark, I understand you're a senior manager in the acquisitions division." "Yes, sir." "That's right." Mark's voice was strained. He still hadn't looked directly at me. "Excellent," David said smoothly. He gestured between Mark and the board member. "Mark, this is Mr. Harrison, one of our most valued board members. And Mr. Harrison, this is Mark Davis. And you already know my wife, I believe. Sarah?" David looked at me, a slight raise of his eyebrow, a silent acknowledgement of the name change. Mark's head snapped towards me. He flinched, as if struck. "Sarah?" His voice was barely a whisper. He couldn't comprehend the name, the connection. He knew my name. He knew David's wife's name was Sarah. The two pieces of information colliding must have felt like a physical blow. "Hello, Mark," I said, my voice clear and steady. I offered a small, polite smile. No triumph, no malice, just cool recognition. He stared at me, then at David, then back at me. The color that had started to return to his face drained away again. His eyes glazed over.
He swayed slightly.
The woman beside him gasped, reaching out to steady him. "Are you all right, Mark?" David asked, his tone still neutral, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. He saw the panic, the recognition, the shock. Mark mumbled something unintelligible, clutching the edge of the bar. He looked utterly defeated, stripped bare in front of his new CEO and a key board member. The air around him seemed to deflate. He knew, in that instant, that his calculated cruelty had boomeranged back at him with unimaginable force. He hadn't just divorced Sarah, his recovering wife. He had divorced Sarah, who was now inextricably linked to the man who held his entire professional future in his hands. This wasn't the simple humiliation I had imagined. This was the unraveling of his carefully constructed world, live and in public, triggered by my mere presence. Mr. Harrison, the board member, looked from Mark's ashen face to David and me with growing confusion. David, still calm, leaned in slightly towards Mark. "Perhaps we could schedule a meeting early next week, Mark. There are a few things I'd like to discuss regarding your division's performance and certain historical practices." His tone was quiet, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Historical practices. The phrase was code. Code for the questionable dealings I had uncovered. Mark understood. His eyes widened further in sheer terror. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like he might actually collapse. Physically. In front of everyone. I watched him, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. There was a part of me, the part that had been so deeply hurt, that felt a cold, quiet satisfaction. He deserved this. Every panicked breath, every drop of sweat on his pasty face. But there was another part, a part that remembered the man I used to love, that felt a pang of something akin to sadness for the pathetic figure he had become. He had done this to himself. His own choices, his own cruelty, had led him here. He mumbled another apology to Mr. Harrison, a weak, pathetic sound, and stumbled away from the bar, leaving the blonde woman gaping after him. He didn't look back. He just wanted to disappear. David watched him go, his expression thoughtful. He turned to Mr. Harrison. "Difficult night for Mark, it seems. We'll catch up with him later." Then he turned to me, a gentle smile replacing the sharp look in his eyes. "Ready for another drink?" The rest of the evening was a blur of introductions, conversations, and the quiet hum of power. Mark's dramatic exit became a silent undercurrent, a ripple through the room. People noticed. They whispered. His reputation, built on bluff and shaky ground, was already starting to crumble. Walking out of the ballroom hours later, the cool night air was a relief. David held my hand, his grip firm. We didn't talk about Mark immediately. We talked about the event, about David's plans for Sterling. It felt surreal, the intense confrontation followed by a return to normalcy. Later, back in our quiet apartment, the silence stretched between us. David looked at me, his gaze searching. "You knew him," he stated, not a question. "Yes," I said softly. "I did. I told him. Not everything, not the raw, bleeding details of the surgery and the text, not the full depth of the pain and humiliation. But enough. I told him Mark was my ex-husband, that the divorce had been difficult, unexpected, that I had reason to believe his professional conduct might not be entirely above board. I gave him the file I had compiled." David listened, his expression serious. He didn't ask for more details than I was ready to give. He accepted the information quietly. He trusted me. That, more than anything, was the true victory. "I had already flagged his division for review," David said, turning the file over in his hands. Performance issues were obvious. This connects some dots I hadn't seen clearly yet. He didn't dwell on the personal drama. His focus was professional. But I knew, and he knew, that my past with Mark was now intertwined with his future at Sterling. The aftermath wasn't a feeling of triumphant revenge. It was quieter, more complex. Mark was gone from Sterling within weeks. An internal investigation, prompted by the information I provided and David's existing concerns, uncovered enough questionable practices to warrant his immediate dismissal. No fanfare, no public announcement, just a quiet, professional disappearing act from the company he had used. His reputation was tarnished, his career derailed. His carefully constructed world had indeed collapsed. And me? I was still Sarah. Not the woman who was divorced by text, but the woman who had survived. The woman who had rebuilt her life, brick by painful brick. The woman who had found love again, real love, with a man of integrity. My life wasn't defined by Mark's betrayal anymore. It was defined by my resilience, my strength, the quiet happiness I had built with David. The physical scars from the surgery faded, becoming thin white lines on my skin. The emotional scars were deeper, but they weren't open wounds anymore. They were reminders. Reminders of how fragile life could be, how cruel people could be, but also how strong I was. How capable of healing, of rebuilding, of finding light in the deepest darkness. Being David's wife wasn't the revenge. It was the reward. It was the life I had built, not on the ashes of the old, but on the new ground I had found. Mark's downfall was just a consequence, a necessary clearing of the path behind me. Sometimes I think about that moment in the ballroom. His face. The sheer, blindsided terror. He thought he had won. He thought he had gotten away with it. He never imagined that the woman he left for dead would rise, stronger and more connected than ever, and that her very existence would be the force that brought his world crashing down. It wasn't about winning. It was about not losing myself. And in the end, I didn't. I found myself. And I found a life that was truer, deeper, and infinitely more valuable than the one I lost. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life. Thank you for being here.